Welcome to Truth Watchers. I'm Heath Henning. Once again, I'm back with part three of discussing the big problems of the Big Bang. We're going to discuss the problems of the Big Bang hypothesis attempt to explain star formation in this episode, but I thought of the points I left off with in the last episode could be elaborated on. So we will first expand on comments about the redshift and angular momentum. So I mentioned the galaxy Sears 2112, which was recently discovered, and the redshift didn't fit what the Big Bang predicted. It is probably relevant for me to explain the redshift instead of assuming that people understand how this functions. I'm quoting from Robert Jastrow because he is well known as an authority in this field. Many people are familiar with his book and it is easily accessible, and his explanation is short and simple. He writes on page 87 of God and the Astronomers, quote, "The method used by astronomers is indirect and depends on the fact that when a galaxy moves away from the Earth, its color becomes redder than normal. The degree of the color change is proportional to the speed of the galaxy. This effect is called the redshift." Unquote. He adds a footnote to this sentence and says, quote, "The effect occurs because light is a train of waves in space. When the source of the light moves away from the observer, the waves are stretched or lengthened by the receding motion. The length of a light wave is perceived by the eye as its color. Short waves create a sensation of what we call blue, while long waves create a sensation of red. Thus, the increase in the length of the light waves coming from the receding object is perceived as a reddening effect." Unquote. So the redshift is taking as evidence for the Big Bang hypothesis based on the perceived expansion of the universe. Jastrow provides an analogy to explain how the universe is expanding to explain the Hubble law. The Hubble law states the further a galaxy is away from us, the faster it moves away from us. Once again, quoting from God and the Astronomers, page 85 through 86, quote, "Consider a lecture hall whose seats are spaced uniformly so that everyone is separated from his neighbor in front, in back, and to either side by a distance of, say, 3 feet. Now suppose that hall expands rapidly, doubling its size in a short time. If you are seated in the middle of the hall, you will find that your immediate neighbors have moved away from you and are now at a distance of 6 feet. However, a person on the other side of the hall who was originally at a distance from you of, say, 300 feet is now 600 feet away. In the interval of time in which your close neighbor moved 3 feet farther away, the person on the other side of the hall increased his distance from you by 300 feet. Clearly, he is receding at a faster speed." Unquote. Now, I recognize that any analogy is going to be faulty at some point and cannot perfectly illustrate the fact it is attempting to illustrate. However, this analogy and any other that has attempted to explain the Hubble law in relation to the expanding universe always portrays the Earth as at the center of the universe, something that is attempting to be avoided in the Big Bang hypothesis. This is hailed as the Copernican revolution. Copernicus, the Polish astronomer from 1473 to 1543, was who declared the Earth revolved around the sun. It is constantly affirmed that Copernicus suffered persecution at the hands of the Catholic Church for rejecting a geocentric assumption, placing the Earth at the center of the universe. Never mind historical facts that Copernicus was not persecuted. His views were published the same year of his death and died from natural causes. Copernicus is hailed as the man who relieved mankind from the religious superstition that placed the earth at the center of the universe because God viewed the earth as central to his creation. Douglas Futuyma states in his book Science on Trial, page 195 through 196, quote, "The geocentric theory of the universe was a theological doctrine developed by St. Clement of Alexandria, Dionysius the Areopagite, the 12th century theologian Peter Lombard, and St. Thomas Aquinas. The geocentric theory was unproven, it was untestable, it was held only because it fit scripture." Unquote. This is a false history constructed to build an emotional appeal against Christianity as if science and religion has always been at war and Copernicus finally sets things straight on the side of science. The same falsification of history is portrayed for the Scope trial, but that is a whole different story. The idea of a geocentric universe existed before Christianity. Aristotle, who lived from 384 through 322 BC, taught it, as did Ptolemy around 80 100 to 175. The first Christian mentioned in the quote above was Clement of Alexandria, who lived from 80 150 to 215, and his theology was frequently amalgamated with the views of pagan philosophers of his time. But he surely did not begin this idea, nor did it originate with Christianity. Thomas Aquinas was a major follower of Aristotle's philosophy. Furthermore, as we saw the analogy of Jastrow attempting to illustrate the Hubble law, and all other analogies I've ever read, have the problem of placing the observer in the center. You cannot avoid the logic. If we observe all galaxies moving away from us, and the farther away they are, the faster they are moving, it logically sets us in a position near the center as observers. Furthermore, there has been some published studies about the redshift that support the concept of Earth being at a vantage point near the center of the universe. This line of evidence is called isotropy, which depicts the fact that galaxy distribution and galaxy redshift all look the same in every direction. Jonathan Sarfati noted in Refuting Compromise, page 156, quote, as Hubble admitted, the observed cosmic expansion could equally well be explained by the fact that we really are near the center of the universe. In fact, features of the redshift are consistent with this, but are a problem if the Earth is not unique, unquote. Sarfati continues to discuss some publications from William Tift. I'm turning to Alex William and John Harnott, who discuss the same thing in their book, Dismantling the Big Bang, page 134 through 135, but have a little more historical development. Quote, astronomer Geoffrey Burbidge published a paper in 1968 claiming that the redshifts of the then newly discovered quasar showed a regular pattern of clumping around preferred values. The pattern was referred to as being quantized. That is, the redshifts were found close to certain discrete values rather than varying continuously. Most people treated it as a curious anomaly, perhaps an artifact of the instrumental or analytical method. However, as time has gone by and more quasars have been studied, the pattern has become clearer and more extensive. Burbidge has suggested that the pattern could be the result of a periodic galaxy formation, or perhaps it could correspond to periodic quasar production from active galactic nuclei. This quantization effect was also observed by Tiff in light from galaxies on a much smaller yet very regular scale and with an indisputable level of confidence. However, creationist physicist Russell Humphreys has pointed out that since we can see these quantized galaxy redshifts in every direction and at the same discrete intervals, this means that the galaxy must lie on the surface of a series of concentric shells, with each shell corresponding to a peak abundance in the redshift distribution. Humphreys further points out that the only way we could see this pattern is if we were at or near the center of it. If we were a long way away from the center, then the pattern would be lost. Thus, our galaxy could well be at or near the center of the universe. The angle between polarization direction of radio waves coming from distant galaxies and the major axis of the source galaxy points to a similar conclusion. In 1997, Borg and Nodlin reported that a systematic study of these angles identified what appears to be cosmic north and south poles. Humphreys interpreted this as evidence that the cosmos is rotating and we are at or near the center, unquote. These authors also point out on page 136, quote, the fourth line of evidence is the recent large-scale map of the galaxies known as the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, SDSS. It reveals a picture of the universe completely opposed to the cosmological principle. The galaxies appear to be distributed in concentric shells focused on our galaxy, and they are far more dense close in than farther out. A Big Bang universe would not produce concentric shells around our location in the sky, and the density of galaxies should increase, not decrease, as you look back in time, because the galaxies were supposedly much closer together in the past. Unquote. As we turn our attention to the formation of stars and the origin of our solar system, we will return to discuss the angular momentum, which I brought up in the last episode. The current prevailing opinion of the origin of the solar system is known as the nebular hypothesis. Interestingly, this was originally proposed by the Spiritist Emanuel Swedenborg, who claimed it was revealed to him by men from Jupiter and Saturn. This is not being mentioned to be an ad hominem argument, but a curious fact of history since Alfred Wallace was stripped of any credit for the natural selection hypothesis, and Charles Darwin was given all the credit simply because Wallace was a spiritist and a pantheist. The nebular hypothesis claims that a contracting cloud of gas would throw off rings, which would condense into planets. Remember that angular momentum would predict the center to spin faster than the outer arms, either of a galaxy or, in the case of our solar system, the outer planet. Jonathan Sarfati mentions this problem in the Genesis account, page 196. Quote, "This would have caused the sun to spin very rapidly, but our sun spins very slowly, while the planets move very rapidly around the sun. In fact, although the sun has over 99% of the mass of the solar system, it has only 2% of the angular momentum." Unquote. So what we observe in our solar system does not fit what we expect to find based on this hypothesis of its origin. However, we have to ask ourselves how the stars could be formed to begin with. Any cosmological model will need to hold a valid explanation for the formation of stars since there are so many of them out there. Guillermo Gonzalez and Jay Richards, two Christian authors who advocate the Big Bang in the book The Privileged Planet, comment on page 152, quote, "The Big Bang produced hydrogen and helium and little else." Unquote. Why is this relevant? Because, according to the Big Bang hypothesis, we have what are called three different generations of stars, which are also called population stars. Third generation stars, also called population 1 stars, are stars that are said to be the youngest. Our sun is such a star. The two different names seem to be counterintuitive, but it will make sense in a minute. Population 1 stars are so called because they were the first observed and the most abundant in our universe. They are metal rich, meaning they contain heavy elements. These elements are supposedly produced from the supernova of previous generation of stars. Generation 2 stars, also called population 2 stars, are less abundant and poor in the elements. These are said to have received the metals they have from generation 1 stars, obviously implying the earliest stars, also called population 3 stars. Generation 1 or population 3 stars are unobserved in our universe and supposedly had only hydrogen and helium and a trace of deuterium and lithium. These have low metal content because they formed shortly after the Big Bang, which, as we quoted above, produce hydrogen and helium and little else. So the terms of population 1, 2, 3 are the first observed to the last observed, and not observed in the case of the population 3 stars. By calling them generation 1, 2, 3, it is supposing the chronology of which came first, second, and last. As generation 1 stars die as a supernova, they disperse their elements into space, which were then condensed into the next generation of stars, which cook these elements to produce heavier elements. Then these stars pass away as supernova, dispersing more elements into space, which condense into a third generation of stars, which are rich in heavy metals. Obviously, lack of observation of any first generation stars, also called population 3 stars, is a problem. Dr. Sarfati explains on page 164 of Refuting Compromise, quote, "However, there are no observational evidence even in our own galaxy that population 3 stars existed or have ever existed. Evolutionists now claim that they were all hot and massive, therefore fast burning stars. However, this is ad hoc and contradicts the earlier papers that argued that population 3 stars could have masses of zero point 0.1 to 100 times the mass of our sun, unquote. He concludes, quote, the total absence of these stars counts as a falsified prediction of the Big Bang cosmology, unquote. Another problem with this hypothesis is noted by advocates of the Big Bang. Guillermo Gonzalez and Jay Richards state in their book, The Privileged Planet, page 157, quote, today supernova pop off in our galaxy about once every 50 years. But judging from the present abundance of metals in our galaxy, the supernova rate must have been much higher early on. Their average rate over the entire history of the galaxy must be about 1 every 3 years, unquote. This is a rather telling problem for the Big Bang. First, through the history, we would need stars dying every 3 years to produce the amount of metals observed today. This does not agree with the current observation or the uniformitarian idea that is usually used to extrapolate the past. Secondly, we need to ask where did all the stars come from to provide so many supernovae, especially when you realize that we have never observed a star form, and all the top cosmologists admit star formation remains a mystery. So, how do stars form? We have already discussed that clouds of gas do not just naturally contract, they continue expanding. Alex William and John Hartnett explain in Dismantling the Big Bang, page 141, quote, according to stellar evolution, all stars begin via the gravitational collapse of gas clouds. As the gas collapses, its temperature rises. This poses a problem because as the temperature rises, so will the pressure, and the increased pressure will halt gravitational collapse, unquote. One of the more popular ideas to counteract the gas expanding is claiming that shock waves from a nearby supernova causes the compression of the gas cloud into a star. This may be evoked to explain generation 2 or generation 3 stars, but how did the first generation of stars form? This is an old chicken or egg problem. You need stars to form stars, but cannot form stars without stars. Another problem arises as addressed by Alex William and John Hartnett in Dismantling the Big Bang, page 146. The supernova solution to the shock wave theory is also self-defeating for another reason, the nucleosynthesis problem. The problem here is that such massive supernovae do not just produce stardust, they also produce very stable remnants, black holes. If there have been many generations of such supernovae that have also left equivalent numbers of black hole, then black holes should be about as numerous as stars in our present day galaxy, unquote. A second idea to form stars out of gas clouds would need to cool the gas cloud. Jonathan Sarfati comments on this option in Refuting Compromise, page 165, quote, the other way would be to cool a gas cloud enough, but this requires molecules to radiate the heat away. However, the Big Bang would produce mainly hydrogen and helium, unsuitable for making the molecules apart from hydrogen gas, which would be destroyed rapidly under the ultraviolet light present. Further, hydrogen gas usually needs dust grains for its formation, and dust grains require metals, which are precisely what's missing for population 3 stars. The heavier elements, according to the theory, requires pre-existent stars. Again, there is a chicken and egg problem of needing stars to produce stars, unquote. Of course, we could expand our discussion to the various ideas of how rocky planets formed and gas giants formed. We could move on to the failures to explain how life could evolve. All these things are relevant, but are moving beyond my focus on discussing the faults with the Big Bang. It simply does not explain the universe we observe, and a lot of the comments I made in the last few videos could be elaborated in a much more technical level. What we have seen repeatedly is that the Big Bang model has not produced any successful predictions, but after measurements were made, readjustments of the hypothesis were made. And this reveals the hypothesis is built upon circular reasoning. Danny Faulkner concluded in a paper titled Fingerprint of the Divine Around Us, which is found in the book The Big Question, Does God Exist?, edited by John Ashton and Michael Westacott, on page 36 through 37, quote, circular reasoning is not new to the Big Bang model. The three most commonly quoted evidences for the Big Bang model are the existence of cosmic background radiation, the expansion of the universe, and the observed abundance of the lighter elements. As for the lighter elements, their abundances were measured and those values used as an input in the Big Bang model. It is not surprising that a theory devised to explain data is consistent with that data. Therefore, neither universal expansion nor the light element abundances are actual predictions of the Big Bang model. And of course, we already mentioned previously in other episodes how the steady state hypothesis predicted the expansion of the universe, and Hoyle even predicted more accurately the measurement of cosmic background radiation. In the end, the Big Bang is a big bust. It fails to explain what we observe in light of the facts of science we know and accept. This is Heath Henning. Thank you for tuning into Truth Watchers podcast. Remember to hit the subscribe button or share it with a friend for more fascinating facts. Check us out at truthwatchers.com because sound apologetics and exegesis of scriptures is important for all of God's children, as it is indicated by 3 John verse 4. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth.